Hi, Burr. And the question is it pronounced perfectly? Burr Sutter.
That is right. Burr Sutter. Sutter like butter.
Oh,
For
Sutter like butter. Okay,
right.
perfect.
Burr Sutter.
Oh, perfectly. So now, what was your first computer?
My first computer that I specifically owned was an IBM PS2 386SX. And it even had, the solid, what would we call that, 3.5-inch floppy that was
Yeah,
actually not floppy.
yeah.
So that was the one that was first purchased for me. I got that one specifically, and it's kind of a funny story because I actually had to write my grandparents in Hawaii
Hmm.
for something that I needed for school, because that's how it worked if you're in a Japanese family. If you say you need something for school, then they're, all right, great, we'll give you some money so you can buy this thing called a computer. They certainly didn't know what a computer was. But I like to think of that computer in the form of coffee, because they picked coffee beans all their lives, as did my mom. And so they had to sell several bags of coffee so that I could get a computer back in 1990, I think it was, or 1989. So my first
You s-
computer is actually still pretty precious to me.
you said Japanese family.
That's right. Yeah, so half my family is from Hawaii,
Uh-huh.
specifically Kona coffee farmers, originally from Japan.
Hmm.
And so that's where how my mom grew up, was on the Big Island of Hawaii in
Hmm.
Kona, picking
Hmm.
coffee, and my grandparents. And so I was very fortunate that they were able to give me some money so I could get a computer back when I was a kid.
And do
And
you like coffee?
I do like coffee.
Okay. And is there still? Can we still buy the coffee from Kona, or is it good one, or you know?
Not for my grandparents' farm any longer, but my uncle's farm is still active.
Hmm.
And so in the family, it's still the second oldest Japanese owned coffee farm in Hawaii. Not first, but second. And so my uncle still continues to farm the coffee,
Hmm.
and you can buy under his brand.
And what's the name of the brand?
It's under Yamasawa. I'd have to go dig up the exact URL. I think he has a website, but I've not ever purchased from it before myself. But I have to go dig that up.
Yeah, we have to do it because a lot of coffee lovers, you know. So I think, and I also like coffee, so it's interesting story. So you have to provide us the link. I will put it in the show notes.
You can definitely pick it up if you go by his house in Kona. That's the easy thing to do.
Hmm.
But I believe he does have an e-commerce opportunity there also.
Hmm. Okay, so you got. I think you are the first one mentioning the IBM computer you had. What was the IBM PS2? You said.
That's right. The At the time I was in school, IBM offered huge discounts to students
Hmm.
for a PS2, a PC, right? A
Hmm.
Windows PC back then. You could get it with DOS or Windows. It was very early on, so DOS or Windows. And that was the computer you could buy for your own personal usage. You could also get a discount, I think, on Toshiba machines as well, oddly enough. But IBM was the one I picked up,
Hmm.
only because it matched some of the things that we had access to in school. So either we had IBM 36, System
Hmm.
36 in school for
Hmm.
COBOL and things like that, or you could get a PS2, and therefore you could run your C compiler or DBase on the
Ah,
machine.
1990. You said. Okay, this is possible because I thought to know how it's possible that you got so early a Windows computer, but you said 1990, so that's possible.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
pretty early on. Yeah.
Hmm. Um, uh, and yeah, okay. So you got one for school, and you needed this for school. So what was your plan? Your secret plan with the computer?
So what's really funny, I actually didn't intend to be in computers at all. And in
Hmm.
1989, I actually first learned about computers in, I believe it was 1986. And I got very lucky from that perspective. I had a teacher that would teach us computers after school, and had us take classes in high school in 1986. And but at that point in time, no one had any idea that you could actually get paid for being a computer person.
Hmm.
It just was an unknown thing, especially in Hawaii at the time. That's where I was at that
Hmm.
moment. And so we were just playing with computers just to play with computers. But when I got to college, I was actually majoring mostly in acting and directing and production. I wanted to be in theater. That was really
Hmm.
where my first passion was. I wanted to be a dancer, director, producer, writer, and I was putting on
So
shows.
almost you are now a conference speaker, so it's almost dancer, right? So I mean, this is not that different, right?
I do get to combine both skills at this point in time. Being a conference speaker, being a presenter at the same
Yeah,
time doing IT.
yeah.
But I got really lucky with the computer thing because my roommate had a sister that worked for Ford Motor Company at the time, and
Hmm.
basically said, "My sister works as this thing called a computer programmer. I think I'll do that." And I said, "Oh, I already know about computers. I can do that."
Hmm.
So that's really when I called up my grandparents and said if I could have some money for a computer.
Hmm.
And at that moment, I taught myself C programming, and I did all my classwork at that point in C primarily. My
Hmm.
data structures, things like that.
Complete different question, because you mentioned several times Hawaii, and for me Hawaii is like, vacation island with beautiful sunsets. And how was it for you? Was it like you appreciate this back then or not? So what if you grow up in a paradise?
Yeah, Hawaii is an interesting story for me because I was actually born in Hawaii, but I
Hmm.
grew up in Alabama, of all
Aha.
places, right? So I have other half of my family is from Alabama, Georgia. Then I
Hmm.
went back to high school in Hawaii and then college in Alabama. I went back and forth several times.
Hmm.
So Hawaii had some important parts of my life, right? Birth certificate, high school
Hmm.
diploma,
Hmm.
but in between was mostly Alabama.
Hmm.
So I kind of grew up with both
Hmm.
both ways of looking at the world.
Hmm.
And I found some very interesting common ground between Alabama and Hawaii.
Hmm.
And I found some I learned a lot about, for instance, racism between the two worlds as an
Okay.
example, because you saw one view of the world in Alabama and a completely different view of the world in Hawaii.
Okay.
And I learned about technology in Hawaii just because I then had that teacher that, and it was actually interesting because she actually was teaching us these things called computers, but it was because her husband was also in the Navy and was on a submarine. So he was
Hmm.
gone for 6 months at a time. So
Hmm.
she had time she could spend with the students and let us use these things called computers after school. So I was very fortunate from that perspective that she allowed us to gain access to the technology,
Hmm.
and then kids could just kind of go play with them and learn about how to build Hello World. At that point, it was Pascal programming. That
Hmm.
was the only compiler that we had available to us, but we did have dual floppies on those old computers,
Hmm.
so you could run the compiler on one and then run your little program and save it on another. So that
Hmm.
was a big win for me.
Okay, but still, you what do you like better, Alabama or Hawaii?
I really couldn't choose between the two just because that would, definitely upset some of my family members, I
But now
think.
you can.
Hawaii is absolutely a beautiful location where
Hmm.
everyone thinks of it from a vacation destination. It
Hmm.
certainly is that, right? Out in the middle of the
Hmm.
Pacific, long ways away for people in Europe, but not too bad if you're on the west coast of the US,
Hmm.
right? 5, 6
Hmm.
hours of flying if you're coming from Los Angeles. But where I live now in Raleigh, North Carolina, it's 11 hours of travel, if not 12. So it's a pretty good distance, but it's absolutely one of the most beautiful places on the planet.
Okay.
One of my favorite places on the planet.
Hmm.
Definitely a place where I feel like my soul belongs, if you will.
Hmm.
It's that kind of magical place.
But as kid, you appreciated that, or was it normal?
I did appreciate it a little bit. And the
Hmm.
reason I say that is I have a great deal of passion for kind of the environment and for animals. And I would
Hmm.
spend as much time as possible with my face in the water, checking out fish and all the other creatures that are
Hmm.
available off the coastline of Hawaii. People always ask me if I was a surfer. I was not a surfer. I was a snorkeler.
Oh,
I
okay.
spent most of my time snorkeling when I could,
Hmm.
do a little boogie boarding and body surfing, things like that. But I was definitely not a real surfer as a lot of kids in Hawaii are not. You
Hmm.
know,
So I watched the movie. The Shark was a shark. No, no shark. It was the Jaws, right?
right?
The
Jaws.
Jaws. Yeah. Um.
Yeah. Well, in Hawaii, there's normally at least one or two good shark attacks a year, just
Mhm.
because there are sharks off the coast, and they tend to pick on surfers.
Okay, this is where you why you were snorkeling. So okay, so what's interesting is that you actually wanted to be an actor or do some stage performances, and you heard about a computer and you started programming. This is unusual. I mean, how you became so passionate in those short amount of time? You know what I mean? So if someone tells you, okay, the computer is a thing, and you start programming in C, this is unusual, right?
I think so because C was not even taught where I was going to school.
Yeah.
I just happened to sit by a kid that knew something about it, and we figured out how to basically pirate a C compiler. I
But
can't
why you
remember.
did it? I mean, this is really it is a lot of dedication, and to do it. So this was interesting. So why you were so motivated to do this?
Motivation, I'm not sure about my motivation, but I've always a kid that loves solving puzzles and building with Legos
Ah,
and
okay,
spending just and sitting at the task for many hours on end just to build something, see if it works, take it apart, put it back together.
okay.
I think my mom told me a story once where I took apart the telephone in the house just because I wanted to see how it worked inside. I don't remember if she ever said I could put it back together, but we eventually got another phone. But I was always that type of kid. I love basically pulling things apart and putting them back together. And especially in the context of software, I felt very comfortable with it right away because I could see that if you did break it, you could fix it, unlike
Hmm.
hardware. right?
Hmm.
Sometimes you can pull apart a piece of hardware, let's say a car engine. If you pull it apart, you often cannot get the parts all back together again. Or if you do, you have parts left over and you're not sure where they go. Well, in software case, it's meant to be malleable.
Hmm.
Right? I really appreciated that right away from software perspective. It's like I completely destroy it, but I
Yeah.
can figure out how to put it back
Okay,
together.
so it was like, you already love computers, but you didn't knew about that, right? So it was like a hidden passion. And this, if you saw the computer, okay, there's something interesting, and then why you appreciated the C programming, right? I guess.
Well, I think that's exactly right. The idea that I had in my head was I loved making things. And I actually talk about that a lot in my presentation. Typically, most kids, I think, are hooked the first moment they get hello, their name, right?
Hmm.
Hello, Burr, in my case.
Hmm.
And I always mention that in my presentations because that was definitely a moment for me. Burr is a unique word in the
Hmm.
English language, relatively speaking. So when
Hmm.
I made the program say hello, Burr, and then I put it in a loop and it said hello, Burr 5 times, I
Hmm.
knew I had created something from nothing, something that did not exist in this universe for the very first time. And
Hmm.
that was the hook for me, was the ability to create. And I think that's the hook for most people that are still in software development to this day. And in my case, it's close to 40 years at this point that I've
Hmm.
been working with computers, and I still enjoy it every day.
Yeah, it gets worse and worse, even, because you know what you can actually achieve over time. So you can achieve more and more, and you have less and less time. That's the tragedy of the of the programmers, I would say. Because if you're a younger programmer, you don't even know what's possible, right? But if you are experienced, you actually know that sky is the limit. You can do whatever you like, but not everything makes sense to do. This is right. So this is it's getting more and more interesting, I would say, over time.
I think that's a really good point because yes, as the more experienced you become, you start doing that internal prioritization and trade-off analysis really quickly in your own head. And
Yeah,
that's very limiting if you think about it
yeah,
versus the kid, right? Who has no
yeah.
limit, no
Yeah.
trade-offs, no prioritization to worry about. And I typically work with big enterprise customers, right?
Hmm.
As part of Red Hat, I work with these big enterprises. If we come from a Java background, we work in the biggest banks, biggest governments, big travel, right? We work in these billion-dollar organizations, and that's all they care about are the trade-offs,
Yeah.
budgetary trade-offs, time trade-offs, investment trade-offs, things like that.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. So interesting. So you started to program in C and learn C. So what you did in C back then? So something interesting or something which worked even. Hello Burr. We already learned. So now, yeah.
Yeah, so funny enough, I had a class in databases and I had a class in data structures,
Hmm.
and while the teachers at the time, the professor at the time, really had no idea as to how some of this stuff actually worked. They were teaching more theory, but we were given projects to do, right? Like, oh, go
Hmm.
build something in a data structure, build us a data structure, something like that. And they were thinking like a dynamic linked list or a
Hmm.
tree,
Hmm.
something of that nature. I ended up building a miniature database engine that basically would write data to disk, index it in just a basic kind of way, take that index, write it to disk. And so therefore I had both the index in one file, the data in another file, and I could basically do lookups against it. There's no
How you got the
SQL.
idea? Just yeah.
Yeah, it was actually just the fact that I was taking a database theory class at the time, so I thought, well, why can't I just write my own database, right? That was
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
it was just one of those things where I thought I should write my own database. But I did a second thing in that project, and this is all in the course of like 1 year of school. I also did a second C-based project, and this is in a DOS world, right?
Hmm.
Old school DOS before there was Windows.
Hmm.
Use box drawing characters and ASCII to basically create pop-up windows and pop-up menus that you
Hmm.
could then highlight with the arrow key up and down, hit enter
Hmm.
to pick
Hmm.
a menu. So dynamic menuing system, a bit
Hmm.
of a GUI windowing toolkit, right? Before there was a GUI.
Hmm.
And I did both those projects for, with the all C programming. And I really fell in love with it right at that point because I thought, okay, I can really build whole systems out of these basic components and C libraries that I was putting together on my own.
Right. And as you say, this is what fascinated me in early Java, because what I thought is, if you program something, you could reuse it later, and over time, you have lots of Lego pieces where you can stitch together and do something more meaningful. This was my very first idea as I started with Java. That they have library of stuff which can be composed, and you become faster and faster. So similar in your case. And by the way, the graphical user interface, I think so. I started as Linux, Red Hat, and SUSE mostly at the same time, and one of them had Yast. I think yet another installation tool, whatever. And this was exactly how you described. It was like bluish terminal windowing system. It looked like DOS, and you can pre-install Linux with it. It came on the CD, and you can choose whatever boot sectors. And I think as SUSE one is Yast, and this from Red Hat I forgot, but both had such systems. And there's even one TUI one as well, TUI, text user interface or whatever. And one is even with Java. So there is one GitHub project which does this in Java. So you can have, text interfaces in Java, like Swing, but in terminal.
I have heard of that one. I've not personally experienced it, but I have been thinking about that more, especially in the context of what we see now with large language models and AI, where everything's just prompt in and text response back. So I've been thinking more about the text user experience. And I actually think what we're going to see going forward is a revolution in user design, user experience design with QE, right? Conversational user UI. So forget Chewy. I call the original one the DOS thing, the VT100, the 5270, right? 3270, 5250, right? The original green screen was Chewy, character UI. Then we had GUI, graphical UI, which also covered what we saw with Windows and into the web. But now I think we have a CUI, right, going forward, right? The conversational user interface or textual user interface going forward. I think that's what we'll see in the next generation of enterprise applications.
The project, what I meant, is called Lanterna, like Laterna with Lanterna. And this is a GitHub project called Lanterna. It has actually 2K stars for a Java project, not bad. And you can have Windows in terminal, basically. Looks DOS-like. It's single dependency. It's a really interesting project. Lanterna. Okay, so you created your own database engine, and you heard about that, but what I wanted to know is whether it was your idea to have two files, index and data files, or was it like mentioned, in school? Because this is actually a sophisticated idea that you can split the index and the data files into two files, right? So you can keep them separated.
It may have been mentioned in school.
Okay.
I don't really remember exactly, but I do remember that I had to use different ways to access the data, right? Yeah, and that's why I had to split it.
Okay.
The concept of the index. Yeah, so I forget which specific data structure I used on either one at this point. It's been a long time, but I recognize the idea that the index would be accessed a different way, right? It's more random access, you need to be able to filter it correctly. It might have been a B tree or something back then to quickly navigate that data set. But that was just then a pointer to the real data and the real row, if you will, in the database over in a different file, so that I could quickly find the character set that I needed over there and pull it out. So I was trying to make it pretty good at the time, really build a real database engine. And what was funny though, is I did all that work. And then I found this thing called DBase 3 Plus, which also gave me all those same capabilities on a laptop or on a desktop back then, including the windowing system and a character user experience, the ability to actually have the index, the ability to have all the data persisted on disk, and just kind of gave you all that infrastructure and all that framework for free.
And okay, but I mean, it was already remarkable that you were able to implement your own database, which was somehow similar to DBase. And DBase was also file-oriented. It was one of the first databases, right? It was DBase and a different name. How it's called? DBase, and we were used together. I would come with the name DBase and the
was it FoxPro you're thinking of?
FoxPro, exactly. FoxPro and another one.
There was HyperCard on Mac that was pretty popular.
Yeah, HyperCard, DBase, and because we had to migrate, not migrate, there was an old project which worked on DBase and the other thing, and Windows didn't support it anymore, and we had to migrate everything to Java. This was one of the projects, so this is why I remember that. Okay, so you enjoyed databases. So what you did was DBase. So you just used that, or you programmed that, or what happened with that?
Oh, I just found that DBase was a kind of way to solve my C problems. Instead of writing such low-level libraries to basically paint screens myself and actually index data myself, which I was writing a ton of that C code just for the purposes of trying different projects, things like that. the DBase kind of gave me that framework for free. So I learned right away that there were these higher level constructs, 4GLs is what they were called back then, right? Fourth generation languages. And so that actually got me my very first professional job, paying job, with doing something called Progress 4GL.
Okay. By the way, Clipper is the name, what I remember.
Okay, yep.
And what was Clipper? I forgot actually. Clipper was it was like a menu system for DBase or something like this, right?
It had its own database, as I remember it, and its own proprietary language, like DBase did, right? So that's what most of these things came from, right? They had their own unique programming language.
So it was competitor of DBase, right? The Clipper.
Right. That's how I remember it also.
Okay. So the exactly, and back then was a big thing that the database and the UI were combined, right? So that you could write everything in with one thing, 4GL, whatever, and then because back then I had lots of my clients wanted to migrate to Java from the old systems, but this was already 20 years ago. So this was like a huge movement. But most of the people were actually happy how it worked back then. So they were more or less forced to migrate because there were no more patch, no updates. But how it worked, most of them, they were power users. They were really happy with the old system.
I think we have seen that a lot in the history of our computing world, right? Especially enterprise IT or business IT, if you will. There was a lot of proprietary tools that came out, especially in the late 80s to early 90s, that people just took advantage of, whether it been Fox Pro or DBase or Progress or Focus or Ingress or Informix. I used all of those actually. And they were all combined 4GL type technologies with relational database backends. Microsoft Access is one people might remember in terms, a little bit more modern than some of the other ones I mentioned. But these tools allowed people who didn't really know programming that well to build whole huge enterprise systems like ERP class systems that ran whole enterprises. And they worked really well as long as that vendor maintained support for that technology.
Exactly.
Some of them are, but even things like Progress is still in use today, right?
And even Smalltalk, I remember there were lots of Smalltalk migration projects that also worked exceptionally well. It was a little bit later, but maybe 10 years later, but yeah.
Yeah, but I also saw a lot of the Java. The good news was Java really rode the wave of the internet, this concept of the World Wide Web being born. And that was the key catalyst, a key moment in time, I think, for an industry to rethink some of their proprietary technologies where they had taken, they quickly built new applications to create, read, update, and delete, right? CRUD-based applications for a relational database, and figured out you could rewrite those in something like Java or C#. I actually saw a ton of C# in the late 90s, early 2000s, where people were simply saying, I want to do this on Windows only. And so C# remains popular even to this day.
By the way, I called DBase 4GL. Is it too early? Or is it 4GL is more power builder, or you could call DBase 4GL already?
I would have called it a 4GL prior to Power Builder. Power Builder was also a kind of a fourth generation language, but was more GUI oriented, right? More point and click oriented. With DBase, you had a programming language though that was higher level than, let's say, C, because C was the 3GL. Right.
So I can actually call DBase 4GL.
That's how I saw it for sure.
Okay, cool. So, but your first job was Progress, you said, right? So not Postgres, Progress. So
Progress, right? So. Progress is still a company that exists today. Still, many large systems still based on Progress, but it was a 4GL package with a relational database built in, kind of like DBase was and some of those other tools. The difference was that it also ran on Unix at the time. There was no Linux, but it ran on, I think, 20 or 30 or maybe 50 different flavors of Unix at that moment in time. And you could scale it up accordingly, vertically scale it on different Unix machines, or it ran on Windows or DOS PCs also. And also supported SQL, which was a brand new standard at that point in time, right?
When was it? Which year?
Well, I mean, this was 1991 when I started looking at it, 1992 when I started actively using it.
And but this is crazy. You said you got the computer in 1990. So 2 years later, you were a programmer and you got money for your work?
Yeah. I was monetizing it by end of 91.
You're crazy. So
you could do that back then, right? Because there were
but after 2 years from zero, and C is already hard. So you learned in 2 years C, DBase, and Progress.
Right. Yeah. I guess
that's remarkable.
Really quickly.
So you work 24/7 or what?
I didn't work 24/7, but I did use a trick that I always tell younger people that
Mhm.
because it doesn't really even apply anywhere, but it's a funny thing. So back in the early 90s, if you wanted to learn a technology, right, you didn't have this thing called Google or Stack Overflow
Mhm.
or YouTube or even now ChatGPT or Anthropic or Perplexity, right?
Mhm.
You didn't have those tools. You had to go to this place called a bookstore, and
Mhm.
they sold books. And
Mhm.
you could not learn a technology that did not have a book. There was no
Mhm.
book on your bookshelf at your local bookstore. You were completely ignorant of the
No
technology.
book, no tech.
Right. Just total ignorance, but without a book.
Yeah.
And so I would go hang out at the bookstore constantly, and also the magazines that came out at the time, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I learned about Power Builder and SQL Windows a little bit later in time,
Mhm.
right? The
Mhm.
magazines
Mhm.
would talk about it and give you little code snippets. But I got really lucky with the progress project that I got assigned to. I convinced the boss. I said, "Look, I know we only have one set of books. We spent lots of money on this thing called Progress software, but can I take the books home every weekend? And he said, as long as you bring them back Monday first thing, you can do that." So I actually took them home every weekend for about a month. And all I did
Mhm.
was work nonstop on that computer that my grandparents paid for with coffee money.
Mhm.
And by the time I got back every Monday, I knew a lot more than the rest of the team. And by
Mhm.
the time I did that over 4 weekends in a row, I knew pretty much most of what was in the books and how to
Mhm.
use it,
Mhm.
more so than anyone else on the team.
But
So
how
that made
old
me,
were you back then? I mean, you said
how old was
teen.
I?
Mhm.
Oh, I was, at that moment in time, I was probably about 22 years old.
Okay, this was show after the school, right? So okay,
Yeah,
so
I just finished up school in 1991, and I was doing this project at the very end of 91 and 92.
okay, but was it school or was it university? What kind of school was it?
It was a university, so Auburn University, Montgomery in Alabama.
Uh huh. Computer science.
No, because they didn't have a computer science offering back then. It was an MIS, Management Information Systems.
But similar, right? Similar to CS.
Very similar to CS, except for one big twist, right? In CS, you will spend a lot more time thinking about writing your own compiler, maybe your own
Hmm.
programming language. In our case, we focused more on the business aspects of IT. So we
Okay.
cared a lot about databases, networks, how users would interact with the software.
Oh,
Uh,
it's even more interesting, I would say, right? So I would say more pragmatic, maybe.
for me, it was, and we were very focused on really how to solve business problems with software.
Hmm.
And so you learned about early software analysis, what we now call a business analyst, I think, at this point in time, right?
Hmm.
How do you decide what paper-based system could look like in software form?
Hmm.
So as you think about the rules, database rules of normalization, right?
Hmm.
We spent a ton of time thinking about, okay, here's all the invoices, customer records, database, here's all the data in paper form. How do you translate that into digital form?
Hmm.
So it was really and it was considered to be a business degree, MIS business degree. So I have a BSBA, right? Bachelor's of Science in Business Administration with
Okay.
an MIS focus.
Hmm.
So it was different than a computer science program, but I
Hmm.
do really appreciate that my focus, even from the very get go, was on how to solve business problems with software as
Yeah.
opposed to just fun software problems.
Yeah. And which you learned some programming languages there, or
I taught myself C in that process,
okay,
but
okay.
it was COBOL was the one they actually want us to focus on.
Hmm. Okay.
Yeah, so
So and
COBOL
after
was
after university, you started working just for a company, right?
right.
And now the worry story begins. Okay, because I thought you started in your youth in school, and in 2 years you learned C, just in your leisure, and then started to work. So I got this was remarkable. But in after university, it's a little bit more understandable, but still a big achievement in 2 years. Okay, and was it an insurance company or what was it?
It was actually a contractor for the United States government, for the Air
Wow.
Force itself.
Hmm.
So I got my very first professional job as in the not working for the Air Force, but I was a contractor.
Hmm.
And the
Okay.
Air Force in this case actually had a project that needed completed. It
Hmm.
was a paper-based system, so the good news was that's what I learned how to do in school. Take paper, make it digital, and then, make it a database, make it a user interface, make it report, make it, interactive, create a CRUD-based application, create, read, update, and delete. And it was specifically a project for the Air Force so they can monitor what they call mishaps, safety issues. So
Okay.
if you're back then, if you're on an Air Force base anywhere around the world, and if you fell down and hurt yourself, that had to be recorded because as a military professional, you're an asset of the federal government. They want to know that you hurt yourself, and that has a cost associated with it.
Uh huh.
And they want to track all that, right? Or if you wrecked a vehicle, there's a cost associated with that, right? You might have hurt yourself and damaged a physical asset, or if you wrecked a plane, right? if
Okay.
you, and so in the Air Force, all these things occurred, so we actually had to price all these mishaps. We had to, we had to actually document them all properly, report on them correctly. That was actually where I got a chance to use my database skills again, because one of the things I had to do was archive all the data into floppy drives, floppy
Uh-huh.
disks. Right. So I had to write another indexing system and another system that actually wrote it to disk so that
And compression as well, or
no
maybe?
compression back then. I didn't have a utility to do good compression that was available to me. I had to make sure that the door was closed though on the floppy drive. Right. So back then you had to click it physically to close it.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to worry about those kinds of things. I didn't get a chance to worry about compression.
The door, the door would close. There was like a spring in the door, right? What?
Yeah. There was a physical latch that you had to click down, otherwise it would not start reading your floppy drive.
No, reading, writing, right? There was like write protection, but the door, I think, in the 3.5 floppy, which was hard, not as
Right.
floppy as the big one. I think the door always closed
Yes, on the
automatically.
3.5, but the one before that was I think it was the 5.25, and
Yeah.
it was really floppy, and therefore it had to know to start reading and writing that the door was closed on it. So you actually had to twist the lever
This is
to get
possible,
to get
right?
it to engage.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
so I had to write a little bit of code that basically said, "Is the door actually closed?" And tell the user, please turn the knob so that you can actually start reading the drive, right? Yeah, reading the disk.
Okay. Cool. Okay. So what happened then? So you learned progress, and then?
Yeah, I learned progress, and we were very successful with the progress technology, because at the time the Air Force was standardizing on this thing called ADA, and they
Uh-huh.
wanted everyone to do object-oriented programming. And the reason that may sound funny, or now it's like, well, doesn't everyone do object-oriented programming? Well, back then it was a brand new idea, right? It was
Mm-hmm.
still a theoretical idea. No one
Mm-hmm.
knew what that was. There was not even C++ at that moment in time,
Mm-hmm.
right? We just had C and Ada and Pascal and COBOL. Those are
Mm-hmm.
the primary languages people used. And the projects around me had significant problems with that, because the standard was based on Ada. They actually had to write their own from scratch database engine, because there was no database. So they
Mm-hmm.
basically started writing a database engine. They
Mm-hmm.
also then started writing a windowing toolkit, right?
Mm-hmm.
A user. And so I knew those things from C. I knew how hard they were. So I didn't really want to be part of those projects. And I was able to choose Progress for our project,
Mm-hmm.
with the rest of the team. We were able to choose our own tool, because our government agency that we were reporting to said, look, we can't afford for you guys to first build a network stack, a database stack, a user experience, user interface stack, and then build the app on top of that. Can you just find something that gives us all that for free?
Mm-hmm.
And I got really lucky, because the manager that I had at the time already knew about DBase. And he was
Mm-hmm.
like, well, there's a tool called DBase that gives you all that stuff for, automatically. Or you just build your business logic on top. And the government said, well, as long as it works with SQL, because SQL is a brand new standard at that moment, and supports Unix, because we might want to scale this to big Unix machines in addition to PCs, that was the two requirements. So we were able
Mm-hmm.
to choose a technology, and we looked at things like Focus, Informix, all these different 4GL tools and different database technologies at the time. We chose Progress, and we got that system built under budget and even under the time requirement, and,
Wow. Uh-huh.
and deployed it. And so that was actually a big game changer for the organization, because every other project was late and over budget, because they
Mm-hmm.
were busy building database engines. They were busy building windowing toolkits. And I mention that right now only because that is still where my mindset always is. Is there a better, faster way to build the thing the customer wants, to solve the business problem the customer
Mm-hmm.
has,
Mm-hmm.
versus, basically getting in there and having a lot of fun? Like,
But in enterprise, it's not always clear what the customer wants, right? This is the first challenge to really find out what they want, and what they think, or what they really want, and not what they think they want, right? So this is yeah.
there's that. So if there's any form of paper-based prototyping, right, whether it be a balsamic or something like that,
Yeah.
or any kind of even just prototyping using throwaway code, I enjoy that sort of thing, just because that's where you really find out what the customer really wants. So I've done that even in the Java universe, right? I took a prototype team and we built throwaway Java. And
Mm-hmm.
once we got the requirements nailed down with the customers, like, oh yeah, that's really what we mean when we say X, Y, and Z. We really need this kind of thing to be saved in the database. We really need this kind of user experience.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had the rest of the team kind of write it for real,
Yeah.
with
I
appropriate.
remember. I remember a project where the client said, "I need an Excel sheet, basically." So okay, and what the client just really needed was a very simple table, but nothing, with formula. Just but the customer wrote down in the specification has to behave like Excel, but actually, what we delivered was a very simple Swing UI, which was not even, it was just a read-only table. It was nothing special. And but one part of the team already started to evaluate, you know, Formula One. Back then, there was like a Excel a sheet emulator in Java and stuff like that. So you have to be careful if you're working with larger companies. So what happened after Progress?
Well,
What is your
I
next technology?
I got really lucky on the Progress thing because I immediately got another job in the Atlanta market.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I went up to do Progress yet one more time, but that was when I had the opportunity to do something called GUI,
Uh-huh.
Windows. So I was one of the first people to do Progress-based GUI, Progress for Windows,
Hmm.
and learned a lot about Windows-based programming at that moment, long before Windows was even Windows programming was not a known thing. So
Hmm.
event-driven programming was not yet a known thing. The concept that the user could click on a button and bypass all your fields, kind of.
Was 311 or 95 already?
This is no, not 95. This is still 311.
Hmm.
Yep. Yeah, because 311 came with a network stack. And actually, prior to that, we were doing 3.0, 3.1, and we had to buy a separate network stack to add to the Windows. So
Hmm.
311 came with a network stack.
Hmm.
At least that's how I remember it, right? And so, you literally, I forget the name of the technology we had to go purchase to get a network
There
stack.
was a trumpet socket or something like this, right? It was a crazy.
I don't remember the name of the product we had to buy, but it was like another $100 to get a network driver. And then, of
Hmm.
course, you had to buy a network card.
Hmm.
While 311 had network stacks built in, at least
Okay.
some form of network stacks for TCP/IP.
Hmm.
But I did that. I did the GUI thing, and this is 94
Uh-huh.
approximately.
Okay.
And so I rode the Windows wave where everyone was going to event-driven Windows-style programming. That's when Visual Basic, started getting into the game. Power Builder, SQL Windows were starting to show up in time. I was doing Progress at that moment, but I then got another opportunity in about 1997 or so to learn something called Silverstream.
Hmm.
So Silverstream was an early Java-based
Application
framework
server.
and technology.
Hmm.
Yeah, it was one of the original application servers before this concept of application servers,
Hmm.
an HTTP-based server that basically
Hmm.
could, handle web-based pages, but also was built for client-server architecture. It was built by the original Power Builder team, and
Hmm.
so the concept of Power Builder with its data window, the idea that you would have this graphical table, like you just mentioned, not a full Excel spreadsheet, but at least a table representing rows and columns from the database. That was a big thing to move from Windows into Power Builder SQL Windows into Java Silverstream version of the same. And
Hmm.
that's really how I learned Java. So I think that was probably about 1997, 1998.
It was 1-1 already, 1997. So you are late to the game. So
Right.
yeah,
Well, we had done some applets with Duke flipping back and forth. Sorry, with
yeah,
Duke
yeah.
flipping back and forth. But had done some things like that, but it really wasn't useful for enterprise
Hmm.
in the original applet phase. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? You still
Hmm.
needed a way to connect to a server that could connect to a database. I was always coming from that perspective. How do you get you know traditional static data coming off people's paper into some form of database so that you could actually query it, see it, persist it, have it as a record?
Hmm.
Yeah, so that's where SourceStream came into play. It gave us that 4GL like experience,
Hmm.
but it gave us the power of Java at the same time.
Hmm. So it was Java 1.1, I guess, right? Not not 1.2. It was too
I don't
early, I
remember
think.
the version number, but I do remember this because it was so funny. In order to build browser-based Java-based applications, the Microsoft browser was the best one at the time.
Hmm.
Yeah, so if you want a performance system to run your Java-based application, it had to be a Windows machine, and it had to be the Windows browser.
Microsoft had back then the Visual J++, and it was like a subset of Java. And
Well, before
interesting
J++,
with
before
hmm?
J++, they actually had the best implementation of Java until they were sued by Sun. And
Exactly.
so that's when you saw the split,
Yeah.
right? J++, and then you saw C#, right? So Microsoft just kind of ventured
Hmm.
off on their own, which was unfortunate because I say it's unfortunate. Had they stayed together, Microsoft did have the best implementation of Java to Java runtime at that moment in time, and it would
Hmm.
have been a brilliant Windows-based solution.
Mhm.
So it would have felt more natural and more integrated
It
versus what
happened
we're.
several times, right? Because Steve Jobs was also Java 1 2000 and wanted to integrate Java, to Mac OS and promise it will be, like native language in Mac OS. And what I remember is the J++, and J++ came without RMI, I think, and JDBC. This is what was missing, right, back then. And it was delivered with Visual Studio. Exactly. It was Visual Studio J++, C++. I think this was the name, right? The entire packaging, and I was able to buy it very cheaply as a student, so this is why I got it. And Visual Basic, Visual C++, and Visual J++. Exactly, this was the packaging.
Yes.
Silverstream. This is interesting because Silverstream and Power Builder. So Silverstream, there were there was also Persistence Power Tier, also an application server which was proprietary, and of course Tenga from BA, also proprietary application server, and all the servers were before Java E. Actually, they were just yeah. Mhm.
Well, a big competitor at that moment in time was also called Fusion, and there was also the folks at Spider Technologies. What were they offering? I'm trying to remember what their product was, but the Spider was either in their name or their actual logo for
Mhm.
the web, right? The concept of
Mhm.
web-based app servers,
Mhm.
was all brand new at that moment in time, uh,
Mhm.
and it was before Java E or J2E was even thought about.
Fusion, Cold Fusion was a product, right? Fusion and
Oh yeah,
Cold Fusion. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
CFML and Cold Fusion was probably one of the most killer products on the market at that moment.
Mhm.
And this is around the same time Microsoft was inventing ASP, right? Active Server Pages,
Mhm.
copying the Cold Fusion model,
Mhm.
that idea.
Mhm.
What did Microsoft call it? They called it Viper, I think, when they had first announced it as a project name. They had Viper, and the Tenga technology and the WebLogic technology were early on.
Mhm. Tenga was before BA, I think.
Right.
BA WebLogic was the name, and Tenga, maybe it was the company Tenga WebLogic, I guess, right? Because they also merged. There was the Tuxedo and the BA. Um, yeah, and Cold Fusion was big. Silverstream, Persistence Power Tier, and lots of servers. The Orion server, but it was later. So interestingly, that it was so early with Silverstream. And was it successful? Your Silverstream project?
I think it was good for me at the time. I was a consultant and a trainer,
Mm-hmm.
and so I was one of the first trainers on the planet for Silverstream and Java technology back then, teaching big enterprises Java, teaching them Silverstream, and so it was very good for me as a consultant. I got very well paid. In some cases, I remember earning like 20 grand a week. Based on the fact that I could teach and use that stuff. So that actually worked out really well. Now it didn't work out well for Silverstream long term. It got acquired by a company called Novell. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't remember Novell, but
Mm-hmm.
Novell was this company that created this thing called NetWare, and they were the originators of the local area network, right? The people that went into the enterprise and big businesses to connect computers together and create a LAN. But Novell acquired Silverstream and then faltered as a business overall, so it took kind of everything down with it. And
Mm-hmm.
Microsoft, of course, just continued to give away the local area network with their product. That's really was the disruptive aspect
Mm-hmm.
from a network
And
perspective.
Novell, they had their own Java implementation, and one of my project was to integrate with Novell's Java because they had the NDS Novell Directory service or system, and it was like JNDI, like I used that, to access um, the uh, the directory because Novell was big back then in printer management and all the network management, and there were lots of demand, to access this from Java. So this was interesting story actually. Novell NetWare 5.0, I still remember. And back then, I think Eric Schmidt was the CEO of Novell back then from this Java era, and he left Novell and came to Google later. This was the interesting part because we interacted with him indirectly back then because of the Novell Java story. Mhm. Okay, so after Silverstream, sorry, I interrupted you.
Oh no, I was about to say I don't remember the Eric Schmidt thing, but I once Novell acquired Silverstream, I
Mhm.
then switched into .NET mode for a while.
Wow.
So that was really when the app server thing had flipped into more of a standardization place. Or there's this thing
Hmm.
called WebLogic in the market. There was this thing called WebSphere. A few other players. Oracle got into the game by acquiring the assets from, I think it was Orion, right?
Hmm.
The Orion app
Exactly.
server.
Hmm.
So, but I was still attending, like going to Java 1, but my day job flipped into C# mode primarily because C# was now the net new thing. And I was building projects on that, consulting for that, training people on that with that consulting company. So that worked out well for me in the early 2000s, doing a ton of C# work with a little Java on the side.
Okay. And this was the problem with me because it was a Silverstream, the Tenga, then Persistence Power Tier, which was half C++, half Java. Then we had in Germany ABAX framework. Maybe it was a little bit later. It was also completely proprietary. Then I don't know whether you remember, it was San Francisco framework from IBM. It was pure Java with lots of patterns, lots of book. It was San Francisco framework with, I still remember patterns, key and keyable and stuff. And before IBM and one server, there was also the Tidestone, Gemstone, lots of stones.
Oh, yeah,
Oh,
Gemstone.
yeah. And for me, it was like mission impossible. I wanted to be productive, but it was impossible because every server was completely different. And then, J2E came out, and for me it was this is great. This the greatest simplification on earth. I only learned the J2E, and I don't have to learn every individual server. This was a mission impossible back then.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. With the what was weird though, when it first came out, we got so focused on EJB, right, the Enterprise
Hmm.
Java Bean,
Hmm.
and that was not the productive part of J2E. That was
Hmm.
the hard part of J2E, I would
Hmm.
say.
Hmm.
And it was built so it was portable, but it came from that object request broker mindset, the
Hmm.
Corba right
Hmm.
mindset, and
Hmm.
so it came with all this complexity that was actually not necessary, and it was simplified over time, right? Now
Yeah.
EJBs are super simplistic. It's just a couple annotations and a single class file, and you're off and running. But back then, you had to have this. I think you had to have at least two different files, an interface and the implementation. You had to have the XML, 2 or 3 XML files or something.
No, it was worse. There was a home, remote, and the class didn't implement the interfaces. That was the
Right.
problem,
Right.
because
So
you had in the interface you had the method create, and you had to implement EJB create with the same signature, but it was void, and in the home interface return the bean. And why that? Because it was optimized for code generation. So at deployment time, as their adapter implemented the interface and called the bean. And the problem was, if you did a mistake, you didn't never got compiler error, you get deployment error. So you get the error later, not earlier. And funny thing, I completely ignored the first version of EJB. So I worked on a project. We built an e-commerce server with a server with servlets and Java Bean like technology without EJBs. And I was at conferences, and I was the only one who was absolutely not interested. And I didn't talk about EJBs rather than servlets and Java Beans. And all the others were absolutely excited about EJBs. I couldn't get it because I don't know whether you remember, the entity beans were remote only at the beginning, and I couldn't get it. So why a database record, is accessible over the wire? And I ask everyone, and they say, yeah, look, scalability. You can spread, the load. But yeah, but I mean, this is you cannot even have a single transaction to update a database record.
well,
And yeah,
I
this
was
was
going to say,
not. Mhm.
yeah, as I remember it, I had worked on a project where we used these technologies, and we found that there was an assumption flaw in the architecture, and
Mhm.
that was they really wanted to take advantage of client server architecture. Basically, you've got a PC talking to let's say a Unix server, Sun, of course,
Exactly.
Unix servers back then. But the problem was it assumed the network was really, really fast, and you could basically
Mhm.
pull all the data from the server to the client, do the work, send it back. And we found
Yeah.
that that was simply not true, right? The networking
Even worse,
feature.
it was not possible because the how this worked is interesting, because there was a Finder interface, and with the Finder interface in CMP, Container Managed Persistence Bean, you got a remote interface back. But if you would like to read, the entire row from a database, let's say the row had 3 columns, you had to call 3 getters, but these were remote calls. You know what I mean? So
Right.
you had one call to find, and then one remote call, not per row, rather than per row and column. So this was the crazy part. And then local interfaces came out, which fixed that. And there was one pattern that you had an EGB, stateless EGB, which was facet to the persistence and solved the problem. Basically, was called session facet. But this was interesting. And what I didn't like, everyone was so convinced about that, and I couldn't get it how it works. So I asked so many people and say, yeah, this is because scalability. It's like, why scalability? I don't understand. So, and over time, we got then the idea that scalability doesn't mean distribution. So scalability could be distribution, but coarse-grained interfaces over time became more important. Interesting. So and what happened after Silverstream? So you started C# and .NET adventure, and how long you stick with .NET?
I did .NET for probably about 4 solid years. At the same time, I was still doing Java on the side and doing some Java projects, but the meat and potatoes of my billable hours was more C# at that moment in time, just because we had some C#
And what was
customers.
your feeling or impression of both? You did Java in leisure, which is already a good sign, and .NET for work. So you still like Java, or I mean,
Oh, definitely. I was part of the
okay.
Java user group, I was continuing to be part of the Java community.
Hmm.
Helped start running the Java user group, even in that moment where my day job was primarily C#.
Uh-huh.
Just because Java, I still appreciated from the perspective of you could run it everywhere, right? You could
Hmm.
really focus on saying I run Unix was a big part of my life still. There's
Hmm.
this thing called Linux that was up and coming in the early 2000s that people were starting to get excited about.
Hmm.
It was still not a big deal in the early 2000s is how I saw it, right? That, there was only aficionados, hobbyists really got into the Linux thing, tearing apart
Hmm.
computers and putting Linux on them. But Unix was still a big deal, right? And you
Hmm.
could scale and run on these bigger machines if you could basically have Java. So I always kept up with the Java thing, even though we didn't necessarily have as much billable work in that category at that moment versus what we had in C#.
That's interesting because I never did C# and I always did Java. So for me, C# was not even on the horizon. Whatever I did was Java. All the project were Java. So this was always curious about C#, but I couldn't. So I remember they tried to replicate Java everywhere, right? So they even, I remember, migrated the pet store to C# and tried to show that C# with pet store is faster and more scalable than Java. And I took a look how it was implemented. And this was Java. We had, like, I don't know, 50 patterns, and in the pet store, Microsoft pet store case, they just called directly the database. There was nothing in between. It's like, okay, this is clear that it's faster if we just pick Java JDBC, who was also faster. But this was interesting. So and why you came back to Java? So you get, yeah.
Yeah, my back to Java was when I got hired by a company called JBoss. So
You work for
yeah,
JBoss, the new dad. Okay.
yeah. So in 2006, I went to work for JBoss. I'd been monitoring JBoss prior to that. I was actually at the Atlanta Java user group session. I forget
Hmm.
what year that was. It might have been 2003 or something of that nature, where Mark Fleury famously gave his free "Don't Suck" presentation,
Hmm.
and it was actually a really amazing presentation if you think of it from the perspective of how to give a great presentation.
Okay.
So, and I can give you a quick rundown on that presentation if you'd like.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so it was Atlanta Java User Group, which was a relatively small organization at that point in time, and we had basically used a conference room to meet at on a
Hmm.
recurring basis. I had just given a presentation, I think, on the concepts of open source and what this place called Apache was, and there was this stuff coming out there called struts, you
Hmm.
know, and some just open source Apache projects which were brand new at that moment. Again, I was continuing to stay very close, and I actually really liked struts. It felt a little bit like that 4GL type technology and gave me a windowing
Yeah,
framework, if you
Struts was
will.
not bad. I would say if you kept the actions clean, it worked. So you couldn't put your entire logic into the actions was the mistake, but it actually worked surprisingly well.
Yeah, especially when you want to deal with a multi-page application navigating those
Yeah.
controllers and views, etc. So I really liked struts at the moment and saw it as I'd actually implemented something on my own in the server string world that was very similar. So that's why
Hmm.
I was like, oh, there's a thing called a pattern here, and
Hmm.
now I can learn about struts. But we saw what we had as the Atlanta Java user group was an app server shootout. So at that point in time, we brought in all the big app server vendors. We invited them all from the Atlanta market. They all had sales teams in Atlanta. So, we actually had the folks from BA WebLogic and IBM WebSphere. I forget who the other players were. I think the Cold Fusion team had already done something with Java as well. So there was that, and there was about 6 different
Adobe
players.
had an own application server as well. I remember right now.
I think Adobe
Adobe.
was there. So we had about
Yeah.
6 players coming in to show off their app server. And the Java user group, being very practical, had basically, some key questions. You have about 10 minutes to give your presentation. You have to answer these 2 questions. 1, what are your key differentiators? Obviously, a salesperson is going to do that. And 2, what does it cost?
Yeah.
Right? You had to say what it cost. And of course, the WebLogic team gets up there and says, we're so amazing. We implement the J2E specifications. We do these really cool EJB. They were very focused on EJBs, and we only cost $80,000 a server. And then the WebSphere team was like, yeah, they do the same thing. And it was like $72,000 a server. And I forget which team. There was one that came in really cheap at $60,000 a computer, right?
Okay.
And so they all had to name their price, but they all kept doing their presentation. And what was interesting is Mark Fleury had walked into that meeting. He was sent an invite. He never responded. The president of the user group had sent him an invite and said, hey, we're going to do the shootout. If you want to come talk about JBoss, we heard about it. Please do. He shows up. I think he was wearing flip-flops and blue jeans, and, he didn't bring a computer, just showed up randomly, came late. So he was put last in the schedule, right? Because he was the last one to show up. And at some point halfway through the other people's presentations, he leaned over to another fellow on stage and said, could I borrow your laptop? And I was sitting in the front row. I'm sitting in front of him so I could see this exchange. And the guy was like, okay, man, here's my laptop. And he promptly built his presentation on the fly with the borrowed laptop. So when he gets up to speak last, he basically says, well, my name's Mark Fleury. I have this thing called JBoss. We're building some, I think, hopefully interesting technology. And he plugs in the laptop because I want to thank my fellow here who let me borrow his laptop so I could build my presentation. And he started off with something super simple. He goes, well, let's just get one thing out of the way right away. How much does this technology cost? All these other folks talked about how their thing cost 80 grand, 60 grand. I think there was still a cheap one at that point in time. It was like 25,000, only 5,000 a developer, that kind of pricing. He goes, and his next slide said, free. My technology is free. And so this got everyone's attention. This is a standing room only. That only sat 50 people, but we probably had 75 minutes standing and it was also hot. Someone had forgotten to turn on the air conditioner in the conference room, right? We didn't even know how because it was a borrowed conference room. So it was hot, packed. And here's this guy just said free. So he had everyone's attention at a point in time. And then he said, well, let me tell you what our key differentiators are. What makes us different? Why is our technology better than the others? You heard all these folks tell us what these great features were. And his next slide said, don't suck. It's not even good English, right? He was like, basically, we don't suck. So we're free and we don't suck. And it went down as the free don't suck presentation. From that one presentation in Atlanta, because Mark Fleury was based in Atlanta at that point, his in-laws, which were helping fund him, were in Atlanta. That's why he was there. I think 6 or 7 of us went to work for him. One guy walked out of the room with Mark and said, I work for you now, please. Let me work for you right now.
Really?
But several of us went to work for Mark Fleury at that point in time. I was the last to join in 2006. I couldn't take on the risk of working for what looked like a crazy person giving away free software, but others, they went to work for him right away, giving away free software. And then, of course, we got acquired by Red Hat in 2006. And so I've been part of the Red Hat team ever since that point. So
how long you worked for JBoss then?
I was only at JBoss for about 6 months before we got acquired by Red Hat.
Okay. And I did a podcast with Mark Fleury. You know this?
No, I didn't know it.
So this was an interesting conversation. You have to listen to it. So this was I explained him Quarkus because he was really interested. So this was actually a really nice guy and a really interesting conversation about how JBoss happened. But we didn't cover the Atlanta part. Everything else, interesting. So this was a nice story. Okay, and you stick then. Okay, I didn't knew that you worked actually on JBoss that deep. And so what is your task at JBoss and Red Hat at the beginning?
Oh, at the very beginning, Red Hat had the Linux offering in the enterprise and doing very, very well with it. The enterprise at that point in time was moving away from, your big old Sun boxes,
Mm-hmm.
paying
Mm-hmm.
$100,000 for Sun hardware and moving into Intel 1U
Mm-hmm.
rack mounted blades from Dell. And they need an operating system, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's where Red Hat was doing very, very well. And they wanted to move up stack, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they were at the operating system level. They wanted to move into that middle tier middleware level to build out, to host applications. They'd
Mm-hmm.
actually made an attempt with Tomcat, if I remember correctly at the time, or at least another app server, open source app server that had not worked out for them. In other words, they couldn't build a viable business out of it. So they acquired the JBoss team. One, we had the brand and we had the machine also. We also knew how to sell open source software, market it and sell it. That was actually Mark Fleury's genius, was one, getting people like Bill Burke and other, Scott Stark and other key people to help build that technology, but at the same time, understanding how to market it and sell it,
Mm-hmm.
right? How to make money off open source software. So they wanted all of that. And so they acquired that whole JBoss team. And we've had people as part of the team still here to this day.
Mm-hmm. And but you personally, so you just worked on what? You coded JBoss, so what is your task?
They
Mm-hmm.
brought me in actually as a what's called a solutions architect at that
Ah,
point in
okay.
time. In other words, so I was part of the sales team supporting them from a technical standpoint and doing the technical demonstrations and presentations around the app server technology, showing people what JBoss could do versus them, let's say,
Okay.
purchasing a WebLogic or a WebSphere, which is what they were thinking of at the time.
So what was the most interesting or most remarkable JBoss project back then?
Remarkable. I mean, JBoss, the app server, was the cornerstone for everything, right?
Yeah,
That
sure,
that
but I mean the client project, not JBoss. JBoss is, of course, it was. Someone referred to JBoss as alien technology with the dynamic proxies and whatever was inside. It was really well architected, and for that time, it was really ahead of its time.
Well, you could dynamically load things into the app server, right? So
Yeah,
this before dynamic loading of things was, considered to be a norm.
yeah.
The fact that it had that architecture where you could dynamically load things with, basically EJBs and servlets and things like that, wars, etc. That was a big win.
Hmm.
So from a developer perspective, it actually was way easier to use, more fun to use than a WebLogic. And so we actually had a lot of customers early on that were using, using JBoss on the laptop, using JBoss on the developer desktop,
Hmm.
and WebLogic or Webster in production.
Hmm.
And so therefore that was our in, right? We could basically then go to the ops team and said, you know what, all your developers are using technology. We know it runs in production. Why don't you just run it in production?
Hmm.
And typically those ops teams would say, well, we really need someone who can support us to have the faith, right, to put this in production. So
Hmm.
who can we send money to in a form of a support contract?
Hmm.
So that's what JBoss Inc. was for, right?
Hmm.
The company was for.
Hmm.
And so,
And training, right? This was the support and
training,
training. Yeah.
documentation. So it really started off as documentation, t-shirts, and coffee mugs. That was really early on how you monetize open source, right? Coffee mugs and t-shirts and training, and books, sold the books. But it quickly moved into indemnification and a support contract, right? Who can you
Hmm.
call when things break?
Hmm.
And the bigger the enterprises were, they had to have that insurance, right? It's
Hmm.
just selling insurance if you think about it,
Hmm.
and someone who would provide a patch stream.
So you stick with a solution architect with JBoss the entire time until I guess Quarkus happened, right?
Well, I mean, if you look at what happened with JBoss after our acquisition, we had the core application server, what's now
Hmm.
known as Enterprise Application Platform, right? That continues to do very, very well. Just app server technology, because J2E and Java E apps aren't going anywhere, right? They're just still out there. You got to maintain them, and they still run the enterprise in a big way. And we had also done things like Drools,
Hmm.
JVPM as two
Hmm.
good examples. We went into InfiniSpan, taking the caching layer out and making it a distributed data grid. We had done various forms of messaging technology, and we did a ton around ESB. And that's actually what I started working on when we came to Red Hat, was all our enterprise service bus technology
Hmm.
and what we'd called SOA back then, right? So it was all about SOAP and WSDL and how to do these, XML over HTTP kind of technology
Hmm.
before we got excited about REST, and how to integrate enterprise applications. We then, of course, acquired the Camel team, Apache Camel team, and
Hmm.
known as Fuse, and that ended up being a huge run for us, right? Basically focusing on that space, and then we made other acquisitions in the case of API management and management, APIs, and how APIs are still an important part of enterprise architecture. So all that occurred. And even before we got to Quarkus, we made other attempts at microservices. So if you go back to, it was 2014, 2015, the world changed dramatically because this thing called Docker hit the
Hmm.
market,
Hmm.
right? Literally, Docker showed up on the world stage, and they basically showed you this concept of Docker pull and Docker run and it blew people's minds. Like, oh my
Mm-hmm.
God, I can run Linux on a Windows machine now,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's kind of what
Mm-hmm.
it was. I can run Linux only solutions on a Windows machine now.
Mm-hmm.
So we had the container thing, we had the Kubernetes thing, right? I could orchestrate many Docker runs at scale, Docker run, Docker run, Docker run now with Kubernetes, and it had this great thing called a liveness probe and a readiness probe. It could do rollovers, right? Automated rollovers.
Mm-hmm.
And so Spring Boot was also born in that window. And
Mm-hmm.
ThoughtWorks defined the phrase microservices. So it was the
Mm-hmm.
perfect storm between late 2014 and 2015.
Drop Wizard was even before that, right? Drop Wizard was big. You remember Drop Wizard?
So Drop Wizard and Vertex had came in right before that with the idea that you could have a fat jar.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. But they happened just before the term microservices became super hot.
Yeah.
And Kubernetes and Docker hit the market.
Yeah.
So they were close, right? Drop Wizard and Vertex were really awesome technology. But it was Spring Boot who rode the wave by declaring themselves the cloud native solution, the microservices solution, the Java ecosystem. Red Hat, we still had things like, I'm trying to remember the technology. We had a couple other attempts at that moment. But Quarkus,
there was the first OpenShift, which was, I think, Ruby based, right? So it was earlier than that. So you had the OpenShift 1.0, and it worked like Heroku almost. So you could push to GitHub, and it was deployed. So it used it with JBoss, and it worked actually pretty well.
Yeah, the original one. So that was when we had gears and cartridges, right? Yes.
Exactly.
Original Heroku-like thing. But we rewrote it in Go for Kubernetes and offered that in 2015. So it was really around that cloud native moment. Everything, the cloud native foundation was created around Kubernetes.
And you bought also, Red Hat bought CoreOS, I think, at that time, right?
It was around the same time. I'd have to go back, since that was not really in my wheelhouse, right? Focusing on that technology. I was more, CoreOS came a little bit later, I believe. And we had made different acquisitions along the way, right? Whether it been in the storage area or container OS area, et cetera, trying to build out that overall infrastructure play. So if you think of Kubernetes, it's another form of middleware. I've given presentations on Kubernetes as your new Java app server because it does many things that Java app server would do, right? Being able to dynamically load applications, manage multiple applications simultaneously. That was really what the original app server was for, right? You didn't want to dedicate a whole machine to an app. You want to have
it's like exploded app server, but even more interesting because if you consider, Kubernetes and dig deeper a bit, what you also see is etcd and stuff like that, which could be actually used for more interesting stuff, but usually it doesn't happen. It just Kubernetes is used on more or less a virtual machine runner, but in enterprises, but it's a really interesting technology. So you were the solution architect, which combined all the Red Hat technologies and try to build a solution for enterprise clients, right?
Yeah, I spent a ton of time with customers. I as a solution architect, right, I was primarily the presenter. There was about, I think, 5 of us at that moment in time working at JBoss and at Red Hat, right, when we got acquired. To basically go out and talk about middleware technology, Java technology to customers and try to get them on board with using JBoss, not WebLogic, using JBoss, not WebSphere. Of course, running that on Red Hat Enterprise Linux because, we had Linux was a sweet spot for us. Though JBoss at the time ran probably 50% of our workloads were running on Windows. Windows was still very popular at that moment and still popular, right, for Java systems, right, Java-based applications. And then I flipped into product management more, working on product strategy, and that was specifically around SOA, ESBs, all the other technologies beyond the app server, right? I spent time on things like the JBoss portal with things like JBPM, right? Business process management, which was just a thin layer on top of Hibernate back then. Drools, right? For doing, things like rules-based systems. So I spent a lot of time on those kind of technologies, leading up until that OpenShift Kubernetes moment, which is when everything kind of switched.
And then you stick with Kubernetes. This is now.
I did several years of Kubernetes hardcore. I did training classes on Riley. I did presentations, wrote books, did a lot of speaking engagements all around the globe.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, all before Quarkus was even born, only because that was the hot topic of the time. Basically, how do you take any form of application, whether it be C# or Java or Python or Perl, whatever it might have been, and run that at scale in this open source technology that allowed you to do a rolling upgrade, rolling update. Yeah, keep in mind, a rolling update was magical not that many years ago, right? You had to have big IPF5 routers and a specialized consultant who knew how to actually manipulate the thing so you could do a rolling update. And Kubernetes made rolling updates for an application, zero downtime rolling updates, free for everybody.
Yeah.
And so it was game-changing technology for the infrastructure within enterprise, basically a cloud technology in your private data center.
Exactly.
Or, hosted Kubernetes as well at the various hyperscalers. So I spent most of my time between like 2015 to about 2020 focusing on Kubernetes.
And what do you focus on from 2020 to now?
I did a ton of Quarkus also because the JBoss team got back to working with the Vertex team specifically, right? And we took advantage of the technology to figure out how we could build a better runtime environment. Take advantage of that fat jar architecture where everything could be loaded into a single executable jar, in addition to making it, compilable right into a single executable. So that concept of what Quarkus gave us was very, very powerful. So I spent some time on that for a portion of time, right? So the Quarkus opportunity was huge, and it definitely has been explosive, meaning the market has definitely adopted Quarkus in significant ways. And it's great technology. It's incredibly fun to work with, right? I love the edit, save, refresh, right? The ability to make a change in that inner loop and see the change in real time. And that's something the JavaScript people had. That's something the PHP people had, the Python people had. But the Java people were like, no, I will save and I'll compile and I'll go get coffee and I'll come back 5 minutes later. No, the application is ready to run.
But coffee only from Kona, right? The Kona coffee.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. But I've actually done in the last year and a half, I've spent a lot of time just tilting into the large language model Gen AI space. That was really been more of an interest to me because I'm always looking at that next technology that can actually hopefully have enterprise context, enterprise application.
Me as well. But here's the deal. We are late, and I would like to re-invite you back and talk the entire episode just about Gen AI. Because and then go deeper, because Java is remarkable. And what they also mentioned, or no, didn't mention in the back channel mentioned, this small language model, which I also find really interesting, even more interesting than the large language models, and even Java capabilities. And what also interests me is integration with OpenShift, what you can do on enterprise and on premise. So lots of interesting topics. And by the way, I'm using Quarkus in all my projects, and not necessarily because of the developer experience, rather than because of its very good cold startup time. So in serverless environment, it just shines.
Right.
And this is one of the fastest, maybe even the fastest Java runtime on the market. And what's also interesting is it ships with very good Java EE and microprofile compatibility. And all my projects were JBoss, Glassfish, Payara based. So it is really easy to migrate from old J2E to Quarkus. And even last week, we had a project which was a really old legacy Java with JNDI lookup and stuff like that. And we managed, I would say, in a few hours to migrate it to the point that it started with, add inject. And we replaced stateless with request scoped. And it could actually run on Quarkus. So the next step, it will run on Quarkus one time. Right now, it's still on Glassfish. But I already know that it will work, which is remarkable because you can pick, 25 years old enterprise application and migrate it to Quarkus and make, cloud native application, if you will, which is I would say it means the investment paid off back then, in standards. If this is possible after 20 years to migrate something that old in shortest amount of time to our newest technology.
I think what you said there is incredibly important. The whole reason we chose Java back in the day was write once, run anywhere. That was the original tagline. And we can continue to run it even though the underlying infrastructure has changed dramatically, right? We no longer have SunOS boxes and Solaris boxes and HPUX and AIUX. We have this crazy cloud scale technology that's out there, or Kubernetes technology that's out there. And we can still run those Java applications to this day and migrate them easily to modern runtimes like Quarkus.
What you also mentioned something interesting is the ADA programming language. And what I do on my slides is I like to show, how fast Java actually is. And one language, or the ranking is like, as I remember correctly, is like C, Pascal, ADA, and then Java. So Ada is before Java, and Java is incredibly fast. And I made fun out of Ada, but what turned out that Ada is actually also the PL/SQL language. So PL/SQL stored procedure language in Oracle seems to be Ada based as well. So it means that this was also a full circle. and and yeah, it's fortunate, but better than stop now and then have entire hour just to talk about LLMs. And I have to tell, it never worked out in my case. I was at a Java user group meeting. I was invited to deliver 2 talks in a row, and the idea was, the first talk was LLMs, then we get some pizza, and the next one is about testing. And what happened is that I talked for like 3 hours, and there was almost no pizza, and it was just LLM, and everything else was canceled. So this is way too interesting. Yeah, I'm looking really forward to talk to you next time. Where people can find you on the internet? So your Twitter handle, Blue Sky, whatever you have.
Yeah, Twitter is just Burr Sutter, my first name and last name, and you can
Hmm.
also find me on LinkedIn
Hmm.
and Facebook. Any of those locations,
Hmm.
and you can even email me at burr@redhat.com. Right,
Hmm.
that's the easy way to get in touch with me if you just want to reach out to me via email or burrsutter@gmail.
Hmm.
So the good news about having named Burr Sutter, I'm pretty easy to find.
Yeah, and if someone would like to have great coffee, you will redirect to the right place, right?
That's right. That's right. Yeah, beautiful coffee coming out of Kona, Hawaii. And I also, by the way, I just got back from a trip to Kenya, right? So I love visiting Kenya
Wow.
from a personal basis standpoint. So I need to find a Kenya coffee hookup there. Then I can have Kona and Kenya coffee all the time.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Bert.
Thank you so much.